Okay, and welcome back, everybody. As we work through building a D&D adventure live here on our YouTube channel. Last week, or I guess 2 weeks ago at this point, we talked about the template that we're going to be using in Notion to do this, and we went into how to start brainstorming ideas for D&D adventures. And so today we're going to pick up sort of where we left off, and we're actually going to take that idea and we're going to start expanding it out into a full blown adventure. Now, a little disclaimer, this process is going to be slower doing it live than you will do it at home when you're doing this for yourself, because I'm going to be explaining my thought process through the whole thing. And we're going to take several weeks to get through writing this. Once you know how to do this, it goes fast. When I sit down and write an adventure for myself that I'm just going to run for me and for my players, it takes at most an afternoon to do most of this. Heck, don't tell my players, but I've been known to do this in the hour before the game to come up with what we're going to do for that day and what's going to be the arc for the next several sessions. So um, so let's go ahead and let's jump into this to do a quick recap. The idea that we came up with last time during our brainstorming session was this quote up top here. We kind of distilled our whole page of brainstorming, of freeform brainstorming, into this. And so we have the characters are hired by a community leader, patron of some kind, to recover the only known deposit of cold iron. That's our MacGuffin, lost in a in a glacial mine once ravaged by disease. The community needs it to save themselves from the foretold coming of we have TK Hag coven name, and that's a placeholder for whatever the name of our hag coven will be, a coven of hags. Led to believe the village plans to fight the powerful Fae, they recover the cold iron, and they being the players, recover the cold iron. But when they return, they discover the village intends to use the cold iron to pay off the coven, thus completing their ancient pact. The party must decide whether to support empowering the coven with powerful Fae-slaying cold iron or convince the community to fight back, knowing there will be consequences to the village breaking their bargain with the coven. So that's our raw idea as we go into this. And something to be aware of is that the idea that you start writing an adventure with does not have to be what the adventure ends up being about. This is all going to shift and change as we work through it. This is just our kernel, our seed from which the ideas that fill out the rest of our adventure are going to bloom. Which begs the question, from this seed, how do we write the rest of the adventure? Because I don't know about you, but for me, the biggest stumbling block was always getting started. Okay, I have an idea. Well, now what? Where do I start? Do I start at the beginning and do I just start working through this linearly? From the players are given a quest to what do they do next? And that seems logical, but the trouble with that approach is that there's nothing to connect each piece to the next. Things become just a series of events, which, while maybe entertaining, one, won't feel cohesive to your players, and two, won't carry them through the sort of rise and fall of the emotional arc of this adventure, which is really what keeps them coming back and keeps them engaged. If you've ever had trouble with player retention, you play a couple sessions and the characters, the players are into it. They're playing the game, but they're not over the top excited. They're not counting the days to the next session. That's generally because they don't feel emotionally invested in the story. And we do that by creating this consistent emotional arc through the campaign. And we're going to see that happens naturally when we work through this in a logical way. So whenever you're addressing how to start a new adventure, where you've got your idea, where do you begin? Ask yourself whether this is a villain-driven adventure or an objective-driven adventure. And so the difference there is that an objective-driven adventure would be something as simple as we need to recover MacGuffin X, or we need you to take this item from this town to that town. Or it could be, we need you to go slay the dragon. It's something where the players are given a specific task external to the challenges that they'll face. That's your objective driven. Your villain driven is the characters are sent to tackle an issue that is caused by the villains. Now, this cue here, this prompt is a little bit of both, but it's primarily villain driven, and this is why. Yes, the characters are sent to go find a MacGuffin, but they're sent to go find this cold iron MacGuffin because the town is effectively being held hostage by this hag coven. They have to recover this to pay off their debt, to prevent something worse from happening to them, something nebulous that we, even as the DM, don't know yet, but we'll figure out as we write this. And so in this case, this is a villain-driven arc. The villain is initiating this. The action happens because of the actions of this villain. And so starting with the villain and their motivations and what it is that they actually want, not just their objective in this adventure, but what they want out of, well, life, will help guide us in writing and crafting each and every component of this. So let's go ahead and let's start with our villain in this case. In this case, we decided that we wanted our villain to be a coven of hags, all right? Now, at this point, you may want to decide what level of adventure you're writing here. You're writing this for first level characters, third level, fifth, seventh, 10th, 11th, 20th, whatever you're playing, whatever you want to write for, because that may determine what kind of villains that you want in this adventure. Or you can wait till you get later on to figure out what villain you want and then build an adventure that is level appropriate based off that villain. Or you can do what I like to do in the beginning, and that is sort of come up with my overarching story and then use that as, as a reskin if needed in certain places, so that before I actually build my encounters, I have the plot and what I like and the emotional arc and how I think this is going to go. And then I adapt that with stat blocks to fit whatever level of character I want to play this for. So you can take whatever tack you want, whatever helps you, whatever makes it easier for you to pick out and make decisions for your villain, go with that. In this case, Witch Coven is a pretty, it's a pretty blanket term. It could cover a lot of things. Yes, there are mechanically hags in D&D, and they have specific stat blocks. But as the DM, you are not bound to that stat block. So we could do a hag coven, and they could all be archmages if we wanted a really high level one. Or they could all be, those apprentice mages, if we wanted a really low level one, or anything in between. We can even write custom stat blocks for them if we want. So I'm not going to worry about level just yet. I'm going to focus on our coven. And a coven, by definition, is 3 hags. So we need 3 of them. So we've already got here our first NPC is our community leader. We know we're going to have to, it's going to be our patron of this adventure, somebody we're going to have to write, but we're not going to worry about them now. We're going to start with our hags. So let's go ahead and a 4th block here. And so I just, I'll use numbers to keep track of these. I may, for myself, decide to go, hey, this is going to be hag 1. This is, hag 2. And then we've got hag 3 down here. Just so I kind of know who I'm talking about. And we'll give them names as we move through this, even just placeholder names. Sometimes it's nice to have a placeholder name or a working title for something, just so you have something to call it while you're drafting all this out, because you can change all this stuff later and rather easily with the magic of Control Find. All right, so first one, hag 1. Let's go ahead and open that up. So this is a new block here. So since we're not necessarily creating a new stat block or mechanically for this, or even if we do, it's not necessarily important just yet. we're going to go with our NPC template. Now, the NPC template here is one that I build out to help facilitate role playing specifically. And so I use a couple terms in here that help me as a DM boil down to just the pertinent information. Because the bottom line is you could write books about every single one of the characters in your campaign. But if you do, you're not going to use 99% of that. And so instead of spending a lot of time and effort creating complex backstories and histories and writing out, well, starting from when they were born, they grew up, and then this happened, and their parents were mean, and all that kind of stuff. You don't really need to know most of that. You just need to make a note for yourself about the things that are going to be important to the story, important to the adventure, and then will help you as the DM role play them consistently. Because that's the key with NPCs. You want them to behave consistently. That doesn't mean that they're never surprising, but it means that the decisions that they make in game are consistent with their personality and their core desires. So we're going to build all that out. So to give you a quick orientation here, I've got this separated into 2 columns, and then we have a place for relevant backstory as needed down at the bottom. And so this first column here is really most of the role play information that we're going to need. And so this is where we're going to focus on filling out right now. This part here is about their relationships. And so I don't fill this out for every NPC that I write because I don't necessarily need to know who's buddy with who. But for characters that are going to get some extensive role play, or who are likely to have some extensive role play with our player characters, I will fill this out. If I'm writing an adventure that uses like a town as sort of a central hub, players have their adventures and they keep coming back to the same town, or maybe the adventure takes place in a city and there's NPCs the players see over and over and over again, I might fill some of this out for even minor ones, like, who's the blacksmith's best buddy, and who is she feuding with in town, just so that there's a little more dynamism in those relationships. But for right now, for our villain, we're going to focus on just this first column. And so self is where I will detail out the stat block. I may give a pertinent factoid or two here. For example, once we name the Hag Coven, I might put that here. So I might say, and I like to bold so I can see this easy. Coven member, and we'll put TBD when we come up with our coven name. All right, so distinguishing feature here is our next block. So when you're describing your NPCs, it's human to just kind of list off a pack of adjectives. Oh, they have steel gray eyes and lank, greasy black hair that runs all the way to the small of their back, and so on. But your players, when they get hit with this wash of adjectives, it becomes almost impossible for them to pluck one out. And so it becomes difficult to remember who this character, who this NPC is, because they just get this smear of semi-relevant detail. And eventually, as you describe one NPC and then the next, those smears tend to kind of blend and mesh together to the point that they lose all value. So instead, I like to use a technique that I think is best described by the author Neil Gaiman. He talks about giving your characters what he calls funny hats. And what he means by that is that these are distinctive features. So this is a feature that is in this story, in this context, unique to this one character. And so it's something that your players can associate with that name. So, they can say, oh, this is the blacksmith Agatha, and she has, a tattoo of a rose on her neck. And so whenever you bring Agatha back up, you can reference that, and they immediately go, oh yeah, I remember who Agatha is. She's the blacksmith, I remember because she got the rose. It's that sort of giving them a little flag that they can pin to this character and they can use to distinguish them from all of the other NPCs that will fill up your world, because there will be a lot of them. And so I like to pick one or two here, sometimes a physical one, sometimes a mannerism, sometimes both, just depending on the character. And then drivers are the internal elements to this non-player character. And so in traditional D&D, we have our ideal, bond, and flaw that our characters develop. And sometimes as we look through some of the published adventures, some of the officially published adventures, there will be those listed out for the NPCs as well, especially ones that you're likely to role play with. I use slightly different terms, not because there's anything wrong with ideal, bond, or flaw, but because these help me personally better understand how these things interact. So I use objective, motivation, and misbelief. So the objective is, what does the character want out of this particular adventure? What's the immediate thing that they want to happen? It's usually in the case of a villain, it's the opposition to whatever the player's objective is. For motivation, that is a deeper core reasoning. Okay, so they want this thing. So for example, these hags, they want this cold iron. Well, why do they want it? And more importantly, why does this specific hag want it? Because her desire, what it means to her, might be different than the others. Yes, they might have the unified goal of, I don't know, perhaps overthrowing one of the Fey courts and becoming rulers of this, domain themselves. But why is that important? Well, one may crave domination over other creatures. One may crave magical power. One may want this purely as vengeance for a past transgression. Um, in motivation, we dig all the way down to the reason, the core reason, the base reason that they have this objective. What need does it fill in them? We'll talk a little bit more about how we do that when we fill out this first hag. And then misbelief is something that is, it's something that it's a falsehood that this character believes to be fundamentally true. I did a short about this a while ago. If you haven't checked it out, it might be worthwhile checking, because it can be useful in your own characters, whether you're a player or you're making NPCs. But misbeliefs are, like I said, it's a falsehood that this character believes to be fundamentally true. And we all have these sorts of things we go through in life. It's these sort of gross generalizations that we make, not necessarily about people, but about interactions, and about the way that society works and the world functions, that seem like they're true to us, but are not necessarily. And so misbeliefs are useful here because it gives your character a blind spot. It gives them a way that they view the world. So, for example, if we had a hag um, who was all about quid pro quo, it's always something for something else. A deal must be struck. The misbelief might be that um, that everyone does everything for their own selfish benefit. And while in most cases that probably is pretty accurate, somebody's always trying to get something out of this, out of whatever they do. It means that they would have a blind spot about altruism, a character who maybe makes a sacrifice for somebody else with no obvious gain to be derived from it, would be unexpected to this hag, which means they wouldn't plan for it, which gives your players something to work with, something to figure out about this character, and realize that there are avenues in to approach or to trick this person. And we'll talk more about how to role play those and how to come up with that stuff as we fill this out. So I've been babbling on about these definitions for a bit, so let's actually start putting some of these principles into action. All right, so like I said, the stat block here, I don't know that we necessarily need to hit that just yet, unless we've decided on a level for this adventure. I've arbitrarily thinking maybe making this a third, a third level adventure, balanced for 4 players, a third level, but we'll come back to that. And we don't have a coven name yet. I I like to pick coven names after I define the witches themselves because the name should kind of reflect the group as opposed to the individuals reflecting the group name. But if it works better for you the other way, go for it. There's no rhyme or reason to how you have to do this, so long as things are kind of linked up. Um, Distinguishing feature, I don't know yet. We could pull something out of thin air, but what I do know is the objective. We know what these hags want. I want to recover all the remaining cold iron from the frozen glacial mine. All right. And we might even say recover. Let's say take. That's a better verb. I want to take. Or claim is even stronger. We could wordsmith all day. But I just write out here in one sentence, what is it that this character wants from this adventure? What is their objective out of this this unified story arc? Now, I try to keep this at a adventure level objective as opposed to a campaign level objective. Um, and I probably should take a minute and kind of define how I use those terms. So I think of your campaign as the arc of your whole novel or your whole trilogy. It is the overarching world shifting plot, or the minimum life shifting plot that is at play here. Whereas your adventures are the segments of that. They're your chapters, they're the individual books in the series, however you want to kind of frame that. But an adventure has a specific um, visible objective. So a campaign, the objective might be something grandiose, like to save the kingdom from destruction. Okay, well, that's wonderful, but that has lots of sub objectives, specific actionable things that the players have to do throughout that. And I like to think of each adventure as one of those actionable steps. So for example, if we're trying to save the kingdom from calamity, we might first have to discover what that calamity is. And so that could be the objective for the first adventure. Then we might have to figure out what we can do about solving that, preventing that calamity. Okay, well, that's our next objective, our next adventure potentially. And then we might have to recover a series of objects. And then each one of those, to recover MacGuffin A is an objective, to recover MacGuffin B is an objective. And so those become individual adventures within a broader campaign. So I like to work from an adventure level and then build out to a campaign level, because honestly, that's likely how you're going to write this when you're even when you're writing sort of these world sweeping campaigns. For example, I have one of the campaigns that I'm DMing for right now it's in its fourth year of continuous regular play. Um, and yeah, I have an idea of where, of the overarching plot. I have my own ideas about the objectives of the big villain. But on the day to day, we're moving through this adventure one session at a time. And so I like to write out each adventure and just cover those sessions, and write out each adventure and cover those sessions, so that I don't spend a lot of time writing a huge sweeping story only to have my players go, yeah, we're going to take a left turn over here and jog off course. And I've got all this work that I've done that I didn't need to do. So I focus on the objective for this particular adventure here. All right. It's my long-winded way of saying that. Okay. So I want to claim all the remaining cold iron from the frozen glacial mine. Great. So motivation. Why does that matter to me? Why does this hag care about that at all? What does that do for them? Okay, well, I kind of like the idea of this of cold iron we talked about last time being particularly dangerous to Fae. If you read some of the old fairy tales, Fae and fairies don't do so well with iron. And in old fairy tales, they do talk about cold iron specifically. we mentioned last time that that was a technique for making things out of iron, where you didn't heat it up, you just kind of pounded it into shape. But for this, we're making it a specific kind of iron, um, or perhaps a specific kind of material. It might not turn out to be iron at all. We'll see. Um, so they want that because it's dangerous to Fae. And they're Fae themselves. Um, and so they could have ties to the Feywild. I like the idea of power-hungry hags trying to take over one of the realms of the Feywild, one of the courts of the Feywild, because that's a pretty big thing. It could have legs to build towards to a larger campaign beyond this adventure. So okay, so that's their maybe that's their campaign objective. And so maybe I note this for myself. I could say campaign objective, take over Fey Court. Cool. But that doesn't have a lot of influence on what we're doing here, other than thinking about why all of this is important to them. So we're talking about an individual now as opposed to the coven. So this particular hag may have the unified goal of taking over a Fey Court. Well, why do they want to do that? What does that matter to them? And so the trick here is to keep asking yourself why, right? I want to take over a Fey Court. Why? Well, I want to be in charge. Why? Well, I want people to bow to my every whim and ask. Why? Because I love the feeling of being able to order people around. Why? Because I want to be superior to them. Why do you want to be superior to them? Because it makes me feel important. Okay. Why do you care about feeling important? Well, I just do. So you ask until you get to that point where there just isn't an answer, where it's like, well, it's just because. All right. So in this case, we're going to say, I like the idea of this hag. She has, I need to dominate those around me to elevate my own sense of self-worth. Cool. So now we have a functional motivation, and this gives us specifically something that our players can work with once they discover this, that you can role play as a DM. This sense of needing to bolster one's self-worth. So it means that this hag might be susceptible to flattery. They might have a blind spot in terms of believing that they are far more cunning than anybody else around them, and the characters couldn't possibly outthink them. And so that might bleed into our misbelief here. So let's say something for our misbelief. What might they hold true? This doesn't have to link itself to the motivation of the objective, but sometimes it's nice if it does. It's useful if they interact in some way. And so what's sort of a gross generalization we could make that is inherently flawed, but conceivable that someone might believe it? Well, so we could say something along the lines of, I am, let's see, we could say only the most cunning. No, let's change it. Let's say something simple, like I am the most cunning I would say the most cunning alive. The problem with this is that now this ventures in the territory of just plain vanity, which is which works, but it gets tiring at some point. So let's say something else. Something along the lines of, well, she wants to dominate those around her, to elevate her own own sense of self-worth. So what might she believe about the world that would cause her to seek out a sense of self-worth? Um, hmm. So she might say something like, maybe there is a strict hierarchy to life that cannot be uh, strict hierarchy that cannot be uh, let's see here, that only the most cunning can circumvent. Okay. Um, so this belief that there's a hierarchy to life, that's an interesting misbelief because obviously there isn't. There's no inherent hierarchy to living things. But if she believes that there are and believes that her own cunning and craftiness can allow her to shift and manipulate that, well, that's something that you can work with here. This um, role player, as there's always a sense of levels here. Someone is always above someone else, and someone else is always below. And she spends her time working and weaving her way in between them. Now, it's important to note that nothing we write here is set in stone. So as we write this campaign and we get deeper into it and go, it'd be better if she had a different misbelief. We can come back and edit that. But this is good enough to work with for the moment. So as long as we're here, let's give her. That's not what I want. Let's give her a funny hat, a distinguishing feature. Now, when you're writing these, something to be aware of and to be careful of is um, using physical using physical features um, as sort of tropes or gimmicky. For example, um, you know, the evil, the big bad guy always having a scar over his eye, or being, disfigured in some way, or we see a lot of that in old Gothic horror. We see that stuff in like the Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. We see that in the Phantom of the Opera. But the problem with some of that is that there's well, it's frankly, one, it's tropey, it's weak writing, but it's also can be offensive, can be very ableist. That if all of our bad guys are, all of our bad guys have, a scar, or they're all missing an eye, or they're all, walk with a limp, or they all have a hunchback, or things like that, that starts to represent that people who don't, hold to the average appearance are perhaps evil in some capacity, which is not the kind of storytelling we want to do here, right? We want to be inclusive at a D&D table. We want everybody to feel happy and welcome. So I like, when I'm doing physical distinctive features, to make it a choice, something that a character did to themselves, right? And so that may not be, and I don't mean like scarification, or it could be a tattoo. It could be something like that. But it, could be a way of dress. It could be an augmentation that they've made to themselves. Or I'll choose a mannerism, a way that they behave on the day to day that makes them unique. And sometimes mannerisms are the most fun. One, because it makes them very distinctive in dialogue and interaction. So for example, if I was to say to you, I'll get you, my pretty, and your little dog too. That's a quote that we would all recognize from The Wizard of Oz. But that "my pretty" in there, that becomes kind of a dialogue tag, and that's a useful mannerism that you could tag onto any character and make them very distinct in role playing, using those terms like, dearie and my pretty and that sort of stuff. In this case, it's very kind of hag-like and kind of cloying and sickly sweet, which I kind of like for the whole, power hungry, autocratic vibe here. So let's go with that. Let's say I, let's see here. I use terms. Let's hear. I use sickly, sweet terms like dearie. I'm sorry, like get you my pretty, and dearie in my speech. Cool. What did I say? I use sickly. I don't know how that's different. Okay, it must be a spacing thing. Okay. Anyway, yeah. So this gives us a distinctive feature that we can use. Now, if we want something more visual, she might have something a little more, something that kind of makes her feel bigger. So this might be a place for a very fine hat. Let's hear. I always dressed in over the top, if somewhat gruesome clothing. Cool. So that gives us another physical aspect here, something visual that our players can tag onto this. And again, I don't use both for every character, but for villains, yeah, it's useful, especially for big villains in this. So got her using my, my pretty and dearie and all of those sort of sickly, sweet, cloying terms. And then sort of the over the top dress, which kind of vibes with her personality, right? She wants to be more important than everybody else, so she should dress more importantly than everyone else. So for the moment, this is all we need to get started. Now, it's helpful, at least I think it's helpful if we give her some kind of name. I don't have anything off the top of my head, and I'll be honest, with names, I frequently don't. So I tend to come over to fantasynamegenerators.com and lean on them. And so I'll come over to something like Fantasy and Folklore, and they don't have hag here as an option, but they do have witch names. And so, I'll come over to a generator like this, or I might even pick one that's kind of unrelated that just has a different flair that I like, and I'll cycle through a couple different options till something kind of sparks. And it's rarely what's listed here. It usually kind of triggers another idea. At the very minimum, we get something that's a little that gives us a little more flavor, gives us a placeholder, gives us something to build off of later. And so I'll look through and go, Sabrina is far too associated with witches, and not the vibe that we're going for this particular character. Rosita, that seems a little too warm. I like Bloodgood though. That's a cool last name. Let's see what else. Linafe, Mayra Bloodgood. Okay, I'm good with that's at least a good placeholder. So Mayra Blood. Good. Cool. So that's what we're going to call her to start. And again, nothing set in stone. We come back later and we go, I cannot do a campaign where I have to say blood good, a dozen times every session. Although, this could be the Blood Good Coven, these could be the Blood Good Sisters. It could be interesting. That's another thing we could do. If we wanted to check out last names, we might go to the Fantasy and Folklore and go over to Witch Coven names and see if they gave us something interesting here. And sometimes it's fun to not just do English names, but to do a different language if they have options here for that. Let's see here. Yeah, nothing of these are jumping out at me. Coven of the Fey Woods is a little too on the nose. I think we're going to skip that one. Sister of the Ice Garden, again, a little too on the nose. So yeah, nothing's really jumping out at me. So we're not gonna spend a lot of time with that at the moment. We'll start with Mayra Bloodgood, and we'll go from there. All right, so that's one of our hags. We got three here that matter. Um, Now, bear in mind that when we're actually scaling this adventure, we don't, at the climax of our adventure, when the hags are confronted, the players don't have to fight all of them. You know, so we may, for example, find if we were going to do this as a third level, a full coven of hags is a little much for a party of four third level characters to take on all at once. So we may end up having the characters fighting one, and the others could flee. We could um, you know, have a thing where they know they're overpowered and they need to, you know, sort of put wedges in between, find the gaps in between the relationships between these coven sisters. But again, that's something we can play with down the line. And so just knowing that we need to know who these are and what these three hags are and their motivations are to write the rest of the story, and we can wiggle everything else to make it fit to our needs for this adventure. All right, so Hag 2, again, NPC template, and we know this stuff. So let's go ahead and let's set to work. So we're going to add, let's see here, Coven member. Come up with whatever that is later. But we know the objective. I want to claim all the cold iron from the glacial mine. Cool. Now, we could be lazy and we could give her the same motivation as Mayra, but it's better if we don't. One, it helps make the characters more distinct, but two, it gives your players and gives you as the DM some more to work with in terms of the relationship between these three hags in this coven, and how that might come into play later in the story. So let's give her another motivation. We know that the campaign motivation is I want to overthrow a Fey court. No idea what that Fey court is, but we'll figure that out. Or you may know if you're running an adventure that's already in the Feywild, has to do with the Feywild. Any Akatar D&D crossover out there? Anyway, cool. Motivation. So why? What does this mean? Well, when we were just kind of spitballing earlier, we talked about one wanting to, a hag that wants to dominate other creatures, but we also mentioned one that perhaps is interested in the power of the magic that would come with being ruler of that Fey court. So motivation. So maybe it's about magic for this one. So I want to overthrow a Fey court. Well, why? Well, because I want to claim the magic of that court for my own. Okay, well, why do you want the magic of that court? Well, because I want the power that comes with it. Well, why do you want that power? Because power is freedom. Well, why do you care about freedom? Well, because I want my freedom. Okay, so we have our list here. This is her motivation is the freedom that magical power can provide. I need the absolute freedom that overpowering magic. Let's see that only overpowering magic can provide. Cool. And by the way, if you're struggling with a motivation, there's nothing wrong with starting with something basic. Truth is not complicated in a lot of cases here. There's a reason that the idea of the seven deadly sins is stuck around. It's because they are seven common motivations for the ugly things that we do in life, right? And so there's nothing wrong with saying, well, motivation is greed. Okay, well, all right, great. Use that as a jumping off point and then sculpt that to your adventure. I need to accumulate all the wealth in the kingdom. You know, Motivation is pride. I need to show that I am the best and the most powerful. Those writing them down may feel trite to you. You may look at them and go, "Oh, that's a really bland character." But when you actually play those, they will ring very true, and they'll ring very powerful because these will be motivations that your players recognize. And so, even if we were to go back, we could say Mayra's is, her motivation or sin is pride, right? She needs to be over everybody else. She needs to be superior to everybody else. And now in this, we've got a motivation of greed. I need all of the magic, not just some of it. I need all of it. All right. And so, what kind of misbelief now would motivate somebody to take these actions? Well, or would create blind spots when they take these actions. Um, well, let's see here. She could say something like, only a powerful. Let's see here. Only the most powerful of magic users could ever be my equal. Cool. So we have a misbelief that magic users, casters of any kind, are one, the only people that she respects, and two, the only people that she feels she might need to be wary of. And this is useful for us as a DM because again, it can guide our interactions with this character and the with this NPC and the characters. So, for example, this hag, when first interacting with the party, might be, might try feeling out the magic users, your clerics and your wizards and sorcerers and warlocks and have you, maybe needling them, maybe goading them, trying to get them to flex their skills so that she can estimate how dangerous they might be to her. But she might completely ignore people that she assumes don't have any magical prowess, such as fighters or rogues or monks, assuming that they're far too weak and far too below her to pose any real threat. Cool. So that gives us stuff that we can work with here. And again, let's go ahead and give her a funny hat or two. So let's see here. What can we put here? If you're ever hard up for trying to come up with this stuff, because it can be tough to just pull this stuff out of the ether, there are some tables that help with this in the Dungeon Master's Guide. So again, we're going to do this on D&D Beyond because I'm not going to lie, I love D&D Beyond. It makes my life so much simpler with all the games that I run. So we come in here and we can go to NPCs, and we can go to designing NPCs. And they talk about all the different things that you can list out here. I don't worry about most of this. I used to write it all out diligently, and I found I spent a lot of time crafting NPCs, and I didn't use most of it. But you come down to things like the NPC appearance, or the NPC talents, and these can give you, or their mannerisms, that too can give you ideas for some of these funny hats. The mannerisms is pretty straight. It's pretty copy and paste in terms of, I could say, oh, I'm constantly making jokes or puns. This could be the hag that's constantly saying salacious things to the party or constantly making fun of them. And these can be pretty much like, roll the die and go, oh, yeah, I like that. And take one of these and drop it in. But things like a talent are also useful. So, for example, if you come in and you just go, oh, well, this hag is an expert cook. Well, if she's cooking all the time, she might show signs of that. She's a hag after all, and they're usually not terribly picky about adhering to more prototypical rules of beauty. So, so she might have, bits of, she might have smears of grease on her from cooking fats. She might have sort of, she might have well, flour or sugar or, runners of frosting, stuck into her hair and stuff like that. So that can give you that sort of stuff. Um, and then, of course, the appearance things. You can add these in. I again try to be a little careful with some of the stuff that you're not, your villains are not always the ones missing fingers. If you're going to use these, I'd say sprinkle them liberally throughout your through your characters, so that if your villain is bald, then perhaps you need a couple good aligned bald NPCs, to just kind of create those balances, so that anybody who's at your table feels at home. But let's see here. Uh, I kind of like the. I don't want to make jokes or puns, but I think the constant mockery of people might be a useful. Um, she's not a flatterer. She pokes people with a stick until they react. I like that idea. Okay, so let's go with something like that. I use a combination of subtle and overt insults to prod everyone around me into revealing their true intentions. And nope, not intentions. Intentions. There we go. Cool. So that's a good mannerism. So that when you're talking with her, the NPCs, you can, or talking with her with the characters, you can throw out insults. You can make left-handed compliments and jabs at them, or I should say backhanded compliments and jabs at them. All right, and then again, let's give her something physical here, right? So she's about magic and power. Well, hags derive magic from weird places, right? Our typical image of a hag is the green hag with all of the herbs and the roots and what have you. We don't necessarily have to stick with that, but the idea that magic comes from um, once living things, dead things, items of power. So she could be something of a hoarder, collector of these bits and bobs, and constantly covered in pouches and of ash and dust and vials of like small liquids and fluids and animal bones on strings around her. And so let's say um, I am covered. No, I should say I dress as though I were a walking apothecaries. Yep. How did I spell that wrong? There we go. Apothecary is walking apothecaries cabinet. Let's see. Yeah. So again, when you're doing these, you don't necessarily have to give yourself something that's the details you give yourself can be impressionistic, right? Because frequently when we see people, we make impressions of them anyway. It's human nature to make these associations, and so you don't have to describe the garment that somebody wears. You can describe the impression that it makes on the characters if you want. And that is just as effective and sometimes more effective because now your players will use their own imagination to fill in those details for you. And you can get away with a very few words, an economy of phrasing, which is often much more effective. Cool. So we've got her down here. Let's go ahead and get her a name. So let's go back up to our which names. Let's find a deal. Let's see here. Let's see what we might find. Ferox. Ooh, I like that. Ferox Bloodgood. I'm kind of growing to the idea of the Bloodgood sisters. I don't know if that sounds good to you, but I kind of like it. So Ferox Bloodgood. Cool. Um, so one thing to point out when you're coming out with names, you notice we've got a name that starts with M, we've got Mera, and then we've got Ferox. And this is good. We don't want we want some differentiation between the names here. One thing that you should try to avoid, just for the sake of your players, is a bunch of characters that these names all start with the first letter or the first syllable, the same first syllable, um, because that gets harder and harder to distinguish. If you have, Aiden, Aaliyah, and Alton in your campaign, well, as your characters learn, meet other NPCs and learn other names, these things are going to get jostled. When you throw back and go, oh, yeah, you remember Alton did this, they're going to get Alton and Aaliyah and Aiden all mixed up, or at least they're more likely to. So, unless there's a really good reason why everybody should have, or why several characters should have names that start with the first letter, try to mix it up. You got a whole alphabet to work with, and very rarely do you need 26 different NPCs outlined before you start playing an adventure. Cool. All right, so Ferox Bloodgood is good to go. And let's go ahead and quickly get into Hag 3. We kind of know the drill now, so let's work through this. NPC template. Let's see here. I want to claim all the remaining cold iron in the glacial mine for my own. Cool. So we got the objective down. One thing I don't think I mentioned, but when I write these, I tend to write them out in the first person. That's just a personal quirk. I write them out in the first person in a full sentence because that helps me get into the mind of the character. You don't have to do that. If you prefer to write them in the third person, if you just jot down something like objective, cold iron, if that's enough to jog your memory, that's perfect. You only need to write as much as you need to get in there. This helps me. So that's how I write it. All right. So let's go back to our 7 deadly sins. Let's make a motivation that's nice and clean and simple here. Let's say vengeance, right? I don't think that's technically a sin. One of the 7 deadly sins, at least. But anyway, vengeance is a nice, easy one to link to. And I like the idea of having one of the sisters have a very specific goal in mind. We still have that same campaign goal, objective to I want to overthrow a Fey court. But the other motivations are kind of these universal, take all the power, dominate all the people. I like the idea of having one of them that is very much there's one jerk that I need to get back at. I am changing the shape of the world to just give a big middle finger to one specific person. That's kind of powerful, right? So let's say I need to get vengeance on a specific Fey noble who wronged me, or else we'll just leave it there. We don't need to say or else. We just say who wronged me. I should finish the whole sentence. And vengeance is all about balance, right? It's about somebody wrongs you and you take out, payment in kind. And so maybe her misbelief is about balance in life, that she could believe something along the lines of The universe requires us to maintain balance in all things, no matter the cost. So something like that can give her, a very powerful blind spot where everything is quid pro quo with her. Everything is deal. Everything is something for something else. And so this might give, you know, this could give your players somebody to negotiate with, somebody to deal with, or to make deals with, in order to overcome the other sisters, especially because the need that she's feeding through this is so specific. They might be able to offer another way to feed it outside of turning over this cold iron in the mine. So, again, just things we can work with here as we kind of shift through this. So, let's give her a distinguishing feature. So, what kind of mannerisms might she have? What would she be like? This is somebody who is obsessive. I am constantly picking at and fidgeting with things. I seem never able to sit. I should say I am never able to sit still. I am never able to sit still. Cool. And then, so, it's constantly picking at and fidgeting with things, trying to keep her mind occupied, because otherwise it's going to bend back, occupied on the present and what's physically here, or else it's going to bend back towards this overwhelming need for vengeance. Okay, and then something physical. Oh, well, if your whole life is about an obsession over one thing, maybe she doesn't spend a lot of time worrying about the details of sort of day-to-day life. So maybe, so we had our first, Mayra is always ornately dressed, if perhaps gruesomely dressed. We've got Ferox, who's constantly, covered in pouches and vials, and looks like she fell into an apothecary. Maybe, maybe this one is kind of just, wears any old thing, if you will. No, but maybe she goes, I give no thought to my appearance or dress. We could say frequently I am gowned in little more than sackcloth. So, take this to an extreme. Maybe she's literally just throws on a burlap sack. That's all she needs. She's hag anyway. She's not too worried about the elements, right? So, maybe it's rags that she wears all the time, because that's just it's easy. Or maybe she just wears something and she never takes it off, and because she's been wearing the same thing for centuries, it's become shreds. She hasn't noticed because of her fixed obsession on this vengeance. Cool. All right, so we're getting to the end of our time here, so let's go ahead and get her a name, and then we'll wrap up having crafted our villains. Valkyrie. That's interesting. Calliope, Valkyrie. There might be something in there. Let's keep looking, though. Briar. Ooh, because she's so prickly. Yeah, all right. So, Briar Bloodgood. Briar Bloodgood. All right, cool. That gives us a working set of villains here. And now that we have our motivations, we can start writing the plotting out the adventure in earnest next time, because we know what they want, we know what they're going after, and we know what they need. So next time, or I should say on next Friday, we'll dig into writing the adventure itself as we kind of work our way through the various sections of that, and filling in what we know based off of what we've built out from our villains, going from there. Anyway, thank you so much for joining me. If this has been of any interest to you, or if you enjoyed my shorts, please check out the rest of my channel. Drop a thumbs up on this video, subscribe so you never miss an episode, and I hope to see you again on Friday. Thank you so much.